Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar here for January 22nd, 2025, Tackling the Non-Human Identity Crisis. Thanks for joining us today. We're really happy to have you. We have an awesome guest. I'll introduce him in just here in a second, but we want to make this interactive as possible. So we have a chat. Feel free to jump out there and ask us any questions as we go through. We do have dedicated time at the end today where we're going to take your questions and answer them then. But feel free to ask them as you go. There's the question box as well, so you can make sure we get back to that. And we will be doing some polls throughout today, so you can interact with us. But we want to give you a chance right here at the top to interact with us, and that is to tell us where you're from in the world. We're always curious. We have a global audience. As you know, this problem sets that we tackle here at GitGuardian and our partners out there in the world are tackling are global problems. So we're always just curious. I am in Chicago, Illinois. That's where I am based. And Lalit, where are you based?
Hey, Dwayne, and hi, everyone. I'm actually based just outside of London in the UK.
Awesome. I haven't been to London in a minute, but I do want to go back. So it looks like we got a place from all over. We got another Yorkshire, UK over there, Amsterdam. The U.S., River Falls, Wisconsin. So welcome to everybody as we get rolling here. But Lee, I could read your bio out to our audience, but I always like to hear directly from our guests. So Lee, could you just give us a quick high-level introduction to yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Dwayne, and thanks to yourselves and GitGuardian for giving us the opportunity to talk at this webinar. So my introduction in a few minutes. I've been in the industry for about 30 plus years. All of that primarily up to last year was in investment banking at a number of big sort of US and European investment banks. I started running order management and trading systems globally at my first investment bank. And that's when I kind of got involved, got some exposure to sort of non-human identities. We had some SOX regulations coming through. I took the sort of remit quite seriously, and then I got tagged within our equities division as Mr. SOX, Mr. Regulatory, Mr. Audit. And unfortunately, that label has stuck with me for the rest of my career. So the last 25 years, I've been running and involved in very large global audit regulatory programs at within the sort of PAM, IAM space, and in particular, non-human identities. If we sort of fast forward sort of into the last few years, I actually started running for one of the banks, one of the largest cybersecurity programs in the industry, looking at non-human identity risks. This was a big sort of regulatory program as well. We dealt with over 100,000 non-human identities, scanning over 1 million credentials. I guess when we started our program 4 years ago, many of the products like GitGuardian didn't really exist in the industry, so we had to build everything from scratch. So I've got sort of hands-on practitioner experience running programs, how to build inventory, ownership, scanning, vaulting, all those things that we'll talk about later. I guess if you then fast forward to last year, I kind of realized if you're a customer, you're a client, you're concerned about sort of non-human machine identity risks, where do you go to get guidance and advice in the industry? There really wasn't anything out there. There were some products that would offer some insight, but to go look for some independent guidance and advice, nothing really existed. So last May, I created the Non-Human Identity Management Group LinkedIn community, and that's kind of now mushroomed. It's 1,600 folks that have joined that thriving community. So the goal was to create a place where people could come talk about sort of non-human machine identity risks, share the latest news and development, and see how we could collaborate as an industry and bring everyone together. After that, we then created a sort of a dedicated portal called NHIMG.org. And our goal again was to educate, evangelize around sort of non-human identity risks. And we built sort of probably the most comprehensive knowledge center around non-human identities in terms of how to understand what they are, the risks, white papers, knowledge center, blogs, videos, and we even share sort of insights on products that you can use in your organization to tackle those risks. So that's really a little bit about me. I guess I'm known in the industry now as Mr. NHI, no longer Mr. SOX. So
Well,
that's my intro.
there's a lot worse things you could be known for in the industry. So those are some pretty good things. And actually, you already partially answered the first thing I wanted to dig into today with you, and that's how you started the thing. But you said there wasn't a good set of resources out there that you could find, at least not gathered in one place. And that's what we're really thankful for you being here and for talking about this topic with us. But I am curious, like, why now? Why do you think that this is the time for NHI management? Like, why do we need this today?
I think, Dwayne, that's a great question. I get asked that quite a lot in the industry by CISOs, security practitioners, and others. There's a number of reasons. Look, I think one, most organizations have gone through a logical kind of maturity path when it comes to sort of security and identity and access management, protecting your sort of cyber barriers to stop the hackers coming in. And then I guess internally the focus was more on, human access management, IGA, and then PAM controls to put in place privilege controls. Look, the NHI or the problem with service accounts, API keys, they've always been there for 30, 40 years, ever since computers existed. But they were always the one that was left on the table, known it was a hard problem to tackle. But also now in the last few years, the problem's got a lot worse. You probably hear terms in the industry like secret sprawl. And effectively, I guess, with sort of hyper fragmentation that we now have in the environment, before everything was on-prem, fairly contained, but still a huge problem. But now with cloud, multi-cloud, SaaS, containerization, and everything that's been going on around sort of more API-driven based sort of services, this has led to a kind of a very complex mesh, an environment, and very, very hard to sort of manage the whole complex estate that we have. And I guess the NHI sort of space has sort of increased exponentially over the last few years. Now the NHIs are not just internally concerned, but they're all out in the wild. And we're seeing a lot more kind of issues, breaches that are recurring. We reported 40 breaches as one of our articles over the last few years. So we're definitely seeing a lot more exposure, especially with things like third-party supply chain attacks. So you don't just have to worry about your own infrastructure, but all your sort of third-party SaaS integrations as well.
And that actually leads us into our first poll question of the day. We want to hear from you out there. Thanks to everybody that shared where you're from in the world. But now we're going to put up a poll here. So it's a part of the Livestorm interface. Let me actually make this one live. Publish poll. All right. You love it. You got to do this stuff live. So you should be able to see this poll now. What is the share of storage versus on-prem? We'd love to know your answers. Mostly on-premise, is it hybrid, or mostly cloud? I guess a hybrid would be mostly one or the other, but we mean hybrid being like, it's about 50-50. You're not mostly just trying to be on-prem. We'll come back to this as we go, so we'll give you a chance to answer this as we go along. But that speaks to this complexity issue. Like, we've never been in a more complex world. And that's something that really we've been thinking about a lot here at GitGuardian as we're working with companies. It's not just that they're trying to be more secure, but they're trying to be more secure in a world that looks pretty different than it did even just a few years ago. But there's a lot of confusion on like what is the right way to do this. And that leads us to really we need a definition of to define this. Because if we're talking about, well, I have the service count over here, I have this secret over here, I got this API key here. It's just all these little piles, it feels like. So maybe we could just give a definition of identity and start clarifying that confusion around non-human, human machine, workload, just identity. What do we mean here?
Sure. Look, I think overall, when we think of non-human machine identities, look, these are digital entities or credentials that are used to represent machines, applications, automated processes or services within IT infrastructure. And these sort of NHIs sort of enable machines and software workloads to authenticate, operate, and perform tasks automatically, including access to other machines, processes, and services without any direct human interaction. So I guess that would be kind of sort of my definition of kind of what we're talking about here. I guess the next slide, Dwayne, we've got like a nice diagram, right? We published around sort of, what are the types of NHIs, API keys, tokens, service accounts, secrets, admin accounts, system accounts, and sort of the industry as a whole kind of categorize things into sort of two buckets. I guess sort of the accounts that are used to kind of manage the machines and the devices, so the servers, mobiles, desktops, and then I guess there's your software workloads, your containers, your VMs, your applications, scripts, and I guess now AI, LLM, chatbots as well. To your question about kind of what are the different terms, I guess people sort of historically would have known the main terms as service accounts and technical accounts and maybe API keys. They may be saying, what is this non-human identity term or machine identity? Look, there's a big camp out there, sort of two different camps in the industry. One is the non-human identity camp, which I guess we've adopted, and then there's a big camp around machine identity. So folks like Gartner, Vanity, Microsoft prefer that term, but the vast majority of sort of product companies and others have leaned towards non-human identity. So I think, that debate on which term we're going to use is probably not going to settle very soon. My personal take on it is, look, starting with machines can have human identities and non-human identities on them. So I think starting from a machine standpoint is probably not quite right. And fundamentally, it's about workloads and managing the workloads and authentication and interaction between workloads across machines. So I guess sort of our view is the sort of non-human identity term kind of summarizes it nicely. And then when you're talking about human versus non-human, that kind of flows quite well. I know there's some arguments that you shouldn't describe something as the opposite of what it's not. But I think we'll let others sort of close the debate on non-human versus machine. But that's kind of our take on where the industry is going around this term and categorization.
So identity management itself isn't new. I mean, we've been around since I think they wrote "Who Am I" as the SH command. This concept of identity, and we've been building on that. And we think of most people when you talk about IAM, you talk about identity, immediately it's like, okay, that's humans. That's what we're talking about: securing the human, the passkey, the MFA, and that's like, if you do a quick Google search on identity management, that's probably where you're going to get if you look for it. But this world of NHI, while definitely not new, we've been dealing with this for 30 plus years, just not defining that. Why is this a fundamentally harder problem to grok?
Yeah, look, great question. People say to me, look, why do you want to get involved in the toughest challenge in the industry and keep doing it again and again? Look, I find it a really fascinating area. I think it is definitely, in my view, the toughest challenge that most organizations will face. Look, what are some of the challenges, right? Look, today, there's very strong controls around human identities. It's a very mature space. But in terms of managing non-human identities, the current controls that are out there, these accounts are typically unmanaged. There's generally very weak controls. They typically have very high levels of privilege, clearly because they're doing highly privileged activities. And these NHIs can be easily discovered, right? They're hard-coded. in source code and other repositories. You can find them on public GitHub repos. So discovering them and compromising them, that once an attacker either discovers them sort of publicly or once they're into your infrastructure or one of your third-party suppliers, once you're in, discovering NHIs is very, very easy today. And then sort of performing lateral movement, getting the keys to the kingdom, and then sort of compromising, stealing, and impacting data. So I think the other challenges are, look, the number of NHIs, like we would quote, typically outnumber humans by 25 to 50 times. And I think if you think about how the industry's evolved, as we discussed around, microservices, and just API in general, and the growth of cloud and SaaS, and then now with AI, people are even predicting that NHIs are going to outnumber humans maybe 50 to 100 times. I think some of the other challenges are that it's very easy for humans to use non-human identities and bypass controls. So even though you've put a lot of effort into sort of your PAM controls to stop sort of inappropriate access using privileged controls, people can easily bypass those controls if they know the credentials, the passwords, the keys. They can just use those credentials directly and effectively bypass the controls. And then how do you even monitor and control and stop that activity, whether it's an external threat actor or an internal one? So I think those are some of the kind of challenges around NHIs.
Especially in a world where we are in multiple environments, adding new things daily. That goes back to our poll, actually. Just wanted to share that for folks that are watching the recording and don't have access to the direct poll. I was trying to share it on screen, but I think that's going to be messier than just reading it to you. Our audience at 58% said they're mostly cloud. Makes sense. If you're starting a new organization today, you're probably not going to build on-premise servers anymore. But you still have they still have a place. I still think there are a lot of great use cases for a Linux box in the corner. 37% said hybrid. That makes sense too. And mostly on-prem. I'm guessing you're working for a larger organization. Let us know out in the chat if that's you, if you're working for a large legacy organization on that. When some people shared their split out in chat directly. So thank you for doing that. But you said a lot there about attackers and about security and some risks there. And you actually have made a top 10 list for non-human identities and secrets. Secrets being part of the NHI, according to your definition here, and even the types of NHI and way to categorize them. But before we jump into that, I understand that this was kind of inspired, at least in part, by a personal set of stories from you, from your experience working in the financial services industry.
Yeah, Dwayne, maybe if you could share the sort of our top 10 that we've got on our portal while we talk. I know recently a number of folks have contributed to the OWASP NHI top 10, which there's some good overlap here. But without going through, these examples in detail, I will share a kind of a real life example. I want to go into sort of where it happened. But a number of years ago, I was contacted by our CISO and head of IM and said, look, we've had a big incident that's occurred, and we believe it's related to NHIs. So we need you to sort of get on top of that. So as we started to investigate this huge production issue, it turned out that a specific non-human identity account, this in particular was a database account, using just simple password-based authentication, and a developer knew the account credentials, i.e. the password, and they were planning to connect to non-production, right, just to perform some activity, but accidentally connected to production. Now, how were they able to do that? Well, there was a lack of environment segregation between the production account and the non-production account. They both had the same name, and they have both had the same password, right? So that allowed for a kind of an accident or lateral movement, right? So that's, if you talk about your standard IAM controls, segregation of duties, least privilege, it broke those basic rules. So that was problem number one. Someone accidentally connected to production with the same credentials as prod and non-prod, and went to production, did something, and it caused a production impact, and a pretty big business impact at the time. Our CIO said, look, let's cycle this password immediately, right, and let's stop the risk from reoccurring so people can stop connecting to production with the same credential as non-prod. But it took us 3 weeks to cycle one password. 3 weeks. Okay. Now you would ask, why does it take 3 weeks and why is it not cycled immediately? As we started talking to the application and team in question that owned this account on a particular database, they said, look, we've got a feeling that this account's maybe been shared with some other teams and they're using it as well to connect to our database, so like upstream, downstream consumers, right? And if we cycle the password, not only will our application be impacted, many others will be impacted as well, right? So this talks to the sharing of credentials, another bad practice around least privilege, and segregation of duties, right? So we then had to sort of figure out, where do we understand all these dependencies? The teams had moved on, they shared the credentials in some cases many years ago, they didn't know who was using it. So we had to turn on monitoring controls on databases and figure out where all the connections coming from to understand. And there were many apps that were using this shared credential. Once we understood that, right, we couldn't again cycle the password, right, because you would have to then ask those teams to move to their own credentials, right, and segregate from the one they were sharing. That's not a quick fix, because you then have to find out where that credential is used in your application, in your code, in your scripts, and then you have to find every occurrence of that credential and then change your code, your script, deploy that code with the new credential before you can then say you're kind of not exposed to that credential anymore. So having to go through all those dependencies, getting teams to change all their code, literally took 3 weeks, and then we were able to cycle the password. But even with all that work done, we hadn't actually put the passwords in a vault. They were still hard coded, right? So again, this is just a great simple example of just one account taking 3 weeks to cycle, and it touches on many of the risks that we've called out here in our top 10.
Absolutely. I'm always surprised because it's something we've known for a long time. Is like event isolation or segregation. Like, you never put a production database in a test environment. You just don't. And we've known this for decades. But somehow when we start introducing all these services, like API-driven services, somehow I think that got lost along the way. One of the other pieces from the OWASP top 10 is reusing the same credential for the same service within the own app, but then, as you pointed out, across teams, across entire applications. So application isolation.
Yeah.
There's just so many ways in. That's a lot. So one of the things I think driving this, and you have this on your list, and it's something we think about a lot here. We've been thinking about a lot, other than our plain text passwords. That's our bread and butter at GitGuardian, help you find and eliminate those and excessive privileges. But at this lack of ownership, that speaks to me as kind of a root cause of this. If you have someone in charge and they say this is how it is, that's how you should do it. But it sounds like that's not the state of the world out there.
Yeah, no, this is probably one of the biggest problems alongside unencrypted credentials. Like, if we were to kind of advise any organization, what do you need to start focusing on first, right? You need to understand the size of the problem, right? And you first need to understand the inventory of your accounts, right? Which is one of our top 10, alongside sort of lack of ownership. Just getting your inventory can be very challenging. Again, if you've got a hyper fragmented environment, different places where you need to understand all your credentials, your on-prem environments, local accounts, just getting an inventory of all your NHIs is a challenge in itself. But once you've got that inventory, trying to understand who are the owners of these accounts, be that a human or an application that's the owner of that account, so you can then drive kind of posture management, hygiene, remediation activities. Again, at a previous organization, we built sort of some ownership capabilities, and it took us 3 years to sort of work through, hundreds of thousands of NHIs in terms of finding out the rightful owners. And that's a huge challenge. The other problem you have is there's a lot of stale, inactive accounts that were created many, many years ago. You don't even know whether they're still in use. And then when you ask a team, look, this is on your database or on your server, I don't know what it is, it's not mine. So people are really afraid, right, to claim ownership or say, well, this is someone else's, not mine. And then they're afraid to even, clean these accounts up in case they're going to cause operational impact. So again, ownership is a massive challenge, but you need to inventory, find the ownership, and then be able to drive kind of remediation, hygiene activities, cleaning up stale accounts and active accounts is another huge problem. We've been at organizations where 50, 60% of the accounts, and these are hundreds of thousands of accounts, where the accounts have never been used in years. And again, that increases the surface area of risk for an attacker to come in and discover those credentials and compromise your systems.
Dereferencing a thing is not the same as decommissioning a thing, and I think that's where a lot of confusion comes around. It's like, well, I'm no longer referencing the API, so does it really exist anymore? And obviously the answer is yes. But that actually leads to our next poll questions. I'm going to slip back over to our slides. Thank you for that discussion there. And we will share at the end the link to that, and we'll put up the link again to the management group and where you can get all those resources. But our audience poll for this next piece, who owns non-human identities ultimately in your organization? Is this a known thing? So we're going to put the poll out. Oh, if I hit the right button, we'll publish the poll right now and publish poll. All right. So you should see that who owns non-human identities ultimately in your organization. Security, IT operations, IT/operations, DevOps/platform engineering. I know those are different things for different people, but we tried our best to lump them together to make logical units of people who have concerns within organizations. But if you think, hey, there's something not on this list, other, mark it as other and let us know that, hey, you're leaving stuff out, and tell us in the chat what you think. And don't be afraid to answer not sure. There's a lot of conversations happening at a lot of organizations right now. So if you're not 100% sure, we'd love to know that too, because that means you're probably in process of this, or hopefully you're in process of this. Let's just leave it at that. So while you're answering that, because I do think that definitely comes down to the crux of it, like who actually owns this thing and who actually is in charge of making sure we did it right, who is ultimately in charge of governance, really. If you're going to simplify it down to one word. But that's a hard problem. But that's one of the things we're seeing tools emerge right now. And this is something that you put out some great reports. You have an event coming up soon on this. And that, if I slide and try and slide. Is that like the primary question people are asking with these tools? Or maybe you could just tell me, the question here, what solutions and tool sets are defining how we're dealing with the NHI space now?
Yeah, look, I think the NHI market has kind of exploded in the last few years. A huge number of startups, products have emerged, including yours at GitGuardian, to tackle the NHI problem. Part of the question would be like, why have they sprung up? Why aren't the existing IAM, IGA, PAM tools sufficient to tackle the problem? As we discussed with some of the risks, how do you discover inventory, all these accounts? How do you understand the risk exposure, the ownership, the permissions, the usage, How are these used in source code, hard-coded passwords? How do you deal with things like hygiene, posture management, excessive permissions, misconfiguration, shared accounts? These are things that the traditional tools, really were designed to focus on more kind of human use cases, and not the very specific things that are needed to sort of understand and manage the life cycle for NHIs. And then how do you go about securing, monitoring controls? There are bits of capabilities out there. Look, PAM was really there to sort of secure them, put things into a vault, but not manage the lifecycle process around them. So really a number of tools have sprung up, right, that try to help accelerate an organization's management and understanding and posture management of the risks around NHIs. Like I said, when we started our NHI program 4 years ago, no products existed in the market. We had to build everything from scratch. 4 years on, now that we've got some great products in the market, they're still maturing. They don't cover everything. But my recommendation would be, if you're starting a project now, you're concerned about NHIs, there are products out there that can now help kickstart and accelerate your journey around managing NHIs. These products can do great things initially around the topics we discussed: inventory, help you with ownership. Like GitGuardian does a great job with things like scanning to identifying your exposures, and then helping you manage sort of the life cycle processes, and the posture management and monitoring of those identities. Are they being used inappropriately? So I think, we're going to continue to see a lot of maturity and growth in the NHI toolset space. I would definitely say to anyone that's thinking about this problem, you need to tackle NHIs separately from humans, even though there's some overlapping, identity processes and lifecycle processes. The fact that we've got lots of static NHI secrets that are out there and identities, you need to kind of get them under control with sort of dedicated sort of programs and dedicated tools. The current tool sets are just not fit for purpose to meet the requirements for managing the huge risks around NHIs.
So I'm curious, and I don't think there's an answer for this per se, but I'm just curious, like, how many people have defaulted to the ultimate tool we all use across the entire industry to manage stuff, be an Excel or a spreadsheet, that are trying to tackle this? This isn't a question for a poll or anything, but I'm just curious, like, now that I'm thinking on it, like, how many people are trying to tackle this on their own with no good tools? And actually, a question for you: when you first started out and there were no good tools, what were you doing? Was it spreadsheets? Was it trying to service now it together? Or?
Yeah, look, I talk about this in the Ultimate Guide to Non-Human Identities that we published just over a week ago, that folks can read offline. We had an inventory system, right, that we enhanced to build connectivity to all of our endpoints to get our inventory. We had a ownership claiming product, again, all custom built in-house, that then we spent years trying to drive ownership claiming activities of these NHI accounts. We had some vaulting solutions, but they were not really designed to meet the requirements of all NHIs, all secrets. So we invested in a strategic vault solution, and we looked at a specific scanning solution. So we brought a few products in around vaulting and scanning, but then everything else we built in-house, end-to-end, including monitoring controls, cycling controls. So it was a significant, tens of millions of dollars of investment just in the running the program, building the tools, let alone then application teams remediating, the credential risks, fixing hard-coded passwords, putting them into vaults, cycling credentials. That's another huge challenge, right, of how do you cycle without operational impact. So yeah, look, this is kind of how we approached things many years ago, but as I said, now there are tools and products that can help you do many of those things and give you a real head start in how to sort of start tackling the challenge.
Well, uh, if the goal is to get consensus on governance and who owns this, I think the consensus right now is there's no clear winner. I'm just looking at our poll results. And again, for folks that are watching the recording of this, we asked that question in the poll, who owns non-human identities ultimately in your org? 23% think it's DevOps and platform engineering, but an equal amount, 23%, say they're not really sure. No clear ownership is visible. IT is 20%, security is 14%, IAM, identity governance, 14%, and other. And I just wanted to call this out because thank you very much for the answer here. Dana out there said application teams own IDs, but IAM and governance owns compliance. So that I think is a real reality too. And I don't know if we're got time to get into that, but where you start splitting up responsibility, and now risk is like, well, I'm not really responsible for that, but I'm responsible for this part of that.
Yeah, look, it's a great point, and I think this is why I say this is the toughest problem to tackle. Within our organization, look, NHIs affects every part of your life cycle. Your whole IAM processes. JML. It affects your DevSecOps processes around. How do you ensure sort of secure coding and prevent checking of credentials into your source code. You've got obviously your vaulting solutions that need to integrate into your CI/CD pipelines, right? So look, there isn't one owner. There are many folks across your organization that need to work together. I think fundamentally, though, my view is, look, this is an identity and access management problem, and I think it sits there within IAM sort of security functions versus sort of the sort of DevSecOps areas. But all of those functions are heavily involved in, controlling this together.
Now, we like to think that everyone is on the same page we are. Like, we got to deal with this like now. This is a problem we should have dealt with years ago, but no time like the present if we can't go back in time. So I'm actually going to ask this audience one last poll for you all. I'm going to publish it right now. Is this something you're actively trying to tackle in your organization? Now, I know we might get some slightly skewed results because you came to an NHI webinar today, and thank you very much for coming. But we're curious, is this on your roadmap, or is this just something you're personally attracted to, and like you're just trying to learn more about it from your own edification? If that's the case, throw that out in chat that you're just like doing this because you're interested in the topic. But other than that, we'd love to see you answer our poll here. And as you're answering that, we can move on here because we're starting to run out of time, Lalit. When we say this, manage this topic, like this is ultimately what we're really talking about here is, are you trying to put the controls in place for the lifecycle management of your non-human identities? So again, we don't have time to go into the full paper, and what we're going to link to it later to go through all of this and on your own, because it's a lot of reading. It's a lot to wrap your head around. Maybe you can just walk us through a real quick high level of what we're looking at here. What is this you put together to explain this?
Yeah, look, I think this is a typical process that you need to think about as you manage the whole life cycle of NHIs. Various products help deal with managing this stuff kind of end to end. But look, fundamentally, it's about how do you provision and decommission your NHIs. How do you make sure that they're secure by design, that when you provision them, create them, if you're using more static secrets, how do they go straight into a secrets vault without human intervention? And then it's obviously, we talked about inventory and discovery and scanning, until you know how many you have, the size of the problem, right? You don't know, the risk exposure you're sitting on, until you can classify, find out whether accounts are used, their breadth of access. You can't then drive hygiene, posture management activities to sort of clean up. And then clearly when it comes to remediation, that's a huge investment. If you've got hard-coded passwords, you've never cycled your credentials, securing them, fixing your source code to move to vaults and other technologies, passwordless, This is a huge uplift. So also you need to think about a risk-based approach. How do you go after your most risky apps, your most risky accounts? You can't tackle this huge elephant in the room, just in a year or a few years, unless you're very small or have a small, simple environment. And then, monitoring, how do you understand what's going on? Is someone doing something inappropriately, some behavior that's occurring that you've not seen before, or humans going in? But look, there's a lot of discussion also about kind of moving away from static secrets to dynamic secrets and zero trust. So the final piece of the puzzle is like, how do you get to sort of more of a preventative control? How do you stop checking in credentials into source code in the first place? How do you move to a zero trust in time model and ephemeral secrets and real-time threat protection, where you can actually stop threats occurring real time? So look, some of these things are much harder to do. So there's a real balance between, do you first focus on controlling your existing risk exposure with your static secrets, and then move more to a strategic footing, with sort of, a zero trust sort of target state. But don't underestimate, this is a huge problem. And, given most organizations don't even have the tools in place to manage most of these lifecycle processes, this is going to be a huge uplift for most organizations. So thinking about the risk-based approach and how you work your strategy is key.
And I love the way you've laid this out as a true cycle, and that's what it is. And it's something we at GitGuardian have been thinking about for a long time. So we're traditionally known for finding your hard-coded secrets where they are outside of the vault. It's like that old joke, everything in the world's a potato or not a potato. It's kind of like everything in the world's a human or a non-human. Here it's like secrets are either in the vault or they're outside of your vault. And vaults being the kind of, everyone agrees, the ultimate best way to store at rest and encrypt as your secure, encrypt at storage, encrypt in transit, and then only be pulled in at runtime when absolutely needed. That tends to be the way that people think about that. So that's something we're building here, and that's something, now time to get into the full nitty gritty. You can go read all about what we're building on our site, but to discover not just outside of the vault, but also in the vault. So places like Jira, Slack, places around the code itself, and then are these secrets that are already in the vault? And then we're partnering with players like CyberArk, HashiCorp Vault, CyberArk's Conjure, to automate that process of, okay, now we've inventoried them. Are they in the right place? When did they get created? Who's responsible for creating this thing? Is it in the right place? Has it been rotated recently? And ultimately help you with that rotation, but also as a cyclical manner, that it's not just a one-off activity. You're then run our agent once, find all your secrets, and then that's it. You're done. That's not that much better than a spreadsheet. It would be a little better than a spreadsheet, and you're trying to write them all down. But that continual monitoring, that make sure that we're tackling this holistically over time. So if a new NHI shows up, it gets taken care of automatically by the governance tooling itself. So we would love to talk to you about that, but I want to get back to talking to you, Lalit, today, and not just go on a pitch here. But the good news is that 42%, and again, I guess this is a self-selecting audience, but 42% of people in our audience said, yes, identity, this topic is a high priority for them in 2025. And that's awesome. We'd love to work with you. And there's tons of resources. And unfortunately, 31% are next in the line, or just went to 30%, said, no, it's currently not on the roadmap. But next in line is after that, we had 18% said, we're discussing it, exploring options. And then that last 17%, we're discussing it. Actually, that just popped. So sorry, that just moved. Now they're tied. We're discussing exploring option. And yes, it's on the roadmap, but it's not top priority. I think it's one of those things that the more you look at it and the more you have those discussions, and especially in the world of security, I think it's going to go higher up there. But there is one last topic before we turn it over to questions and completely answer your questions. So feel free to use the questions. We already got a couple in there we'll get to, I promise. But we want to talk about this elephant in the room that we weren't thinking of when we first started going down this route. This is actually, sorry, I forgot I had slides to explain what we're doing here. And our GitGuardian GitGuardian messaging. You can find this on our website. I'm not going to dwell on this, but you can go and there's a banner at the very top for NHI, and we'll put the link out there in chat so you can go and investigate this. But for the sake of time, I want to move on to the new thing we found. Not new, but this phenomenon we found called multi-vault dilemma. We put out a state, or the Voice of the Practitioner report. We can link that as well. But the Voice of the Practitioner report, we with CyberArk interviewed or surveyed over 1,000 IT professionals with decision makers, and we found the average number of vaults in the large enterprise is around 6. That was the average. So some people I have talked to personally were like, "Oh, it's way higher than that. We have like vaults per application. We have vaults per area of concern." Wow. That's is this part of why this is so hard in your opinion?
Look, I think it points to why, to the original point, there is no management of NHIs today. There are no lifecycle processes that most organizations have. Most orgs have evolved organically and built various solutions within different departments, different capabilities, and they've got some old vault solutions and then some newer ones. So look, this just points to what we've discussed over the last 45 minutes, that really you need to think about the full end-to-end life cycle. How do your NHIs get provisioned? How do they get into a vault? And even just putting something in a vault, is not the answer, right? There's challenges around namespaces, naming conventions. Just putting a password in a vault, but not knowing what it is, then how can you do cycling? There's a lot of thought that needs to go into how you manage this sort of end-to-end from a proper lifecycle management standpoint. I guess I've got lots of war wounds, dealing with some of this stuff, trying to get hundreds of thousands of NHIs into some of our strategic vaults. You shouldn't underestimate the challenge and the mess that's out there, that you may already have. So just saying you've secured your credential is just really a false hope. That doesn't mean you've got control of this huge problem. And clearly you want to consolidate your vault solutions where you can, because then you can streamline things like automation, cycling, integration into your CI/CD pipelines. But this is not a surprising stat to see. I've seen very similar things at many of the orgs we've worked at as well.
Yeah, and it definitely points back to your cycle. Like, it's not just we do this one part, this one little circle on here, and we're done. Even within that circle, there's a lot of work to do. Like, I didn't think about namespacing. It's something I don't really discuss, but that's a real thing. Like, you got to figure out how you do that. And that points back to the need for governance. Like, governance is not a one tool, you're done option. Governance can be implemented with tools, but governance goes beyond that. It's the decision.
Yeah, I think like governance, policy, standards are critical, right? I think people need to know, right? Hard coding secrets in your source code is totally unacceptable in this day and age. With a security first kind of mindset. Previous orgs, we basically laid down the law and said, look, if a developer checks in code, it's a disciplinary action and it could lead to sort of termination. Oh. That's how serious our previous organizations took this. So you do really need to start at the top, start with your policy, standards, controls, training, education is critical as well. So you can stop the bleeding, right? And
that's a great place to leave it. And stop the bleeding and then figure out the rest of it. And that's what we're here to help you do. So thanks again, Lalit. Before we open up for questions, I just want to say thank you. Make sure we get that well said. We'll sum up here at the end, but as promised, we have some links to nhimg.org and managergroup.org here. But while we'll leave this on the screen so you can take the what do you call it, the QR code, or you go to those links at the bottom, that'll get you there instead of having to type out the giant long link. They all get you the same place, or get you the right place. If you haven't read The Ultimate Guide to Non-Human Identities, it's a great read, and I would highly recommend that. But we will go to questions now. So the first question I asked a while ago, so thanks for your patience if you're still on the air, Zaman. Tell us about the NHI group or NHI management group and OWASP. Do they have a partnership, or are you connected? Did you influence the top 10 there at all?
We aren't heavily involved at the moment with OWASP. I guess our top 10 we created about a year ago, but a number of organizations, I guess, including GitGuardian and various other vendors have kind of collaborated together. But I will probably start to get more involved with OWASP and help influence, some of the direction we take together as an industry. But look, I'm really pleased to see that the industry is really starting to come together, and that's the goal and mission of our community, is to drive maturity, through standards, best practices, and improving the capabilities in the product landscape to really help organizations tackle this problem faster, cheaper, and protect from all the threats that are out there.
So I'm going to drop out in chat. We actually have a blog post about the OWASP top 10. Your top 10 is awesome as well, and I highly recommend people read both. A top 10 list is a set of resources, and the more you read, the better informed you are, and everybody should be happier. All right, so next question, a little more in depth. And well, we could do an entire webinar about this topic. So Lee, you have definitely opened up a can of worms here. We might run out of time with this one. With the advances in AI, could the high percentage of NHIs pose a threat if AI operates autonomously while controlling them?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of discussion in the industry around AI and the intersection with NHIs. Clearly, all the AI agents are running under the guises of a non-human identity. Clearly, AI agents will have highly privileged and broad access to do the functions it's been designed to do. So how do you secure the NHIs? How do you put guardrails around them? There's been some major breaches already that have occurred, LLM hijacking, where API keys were used to compromise and overtake some LLM models for dark role playing earlier this year. So yes, huge concern. Look, AI is going to be great in helping us accelerate maybe the risk management of NHIs, but I think the attackers are going to be going after NHIs more and more now, knowing that once they've got them, they can get to the AI agents and models and do some dangerous and concerning stuff with the power that comes with AI.
One of my bigger fears with AI and autonomy is that we'll start allowing AIs to create and deploy NHIs.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's terrifying, especially if you don't have a governance model in place. If you have a strict governance model, AI is pretty good about following the rules. It will do what you tell it, as long as here's the scope. It will do it in an unexpected way. I'm just reading a book about that right now, the unexpectedness of AI. It just surprises us. So letting it have agency and do things that could affect, hopefully not production anytime soon, but open up that world of we're going to implement all of these NHIs, but there's no real model around it. That's scary to me.
Very, very. I mean, the dynamic nature of being able to create NHIs, that's the big concern now, that the number of NHIs are going to increase exponentially with AI, and the controls of those are very, very concerning to the industry.
All right. Well, we got a couple more questions, and I think we got enough time to get to them. Kshad, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I am terrible with pronouncing names. Are there any industry standards which have provided some guidance on how to work with NHIs?
Well, that's a great question. Well, there's quite a few standards that are out there. And again, you can read our ultimate guide where we talk about them. I think the most popular ones, the most mature one so far, I think is SPIRE, right? So this is the secure protection identity framework for everyone. So that's sort of kind of fairly well established. There's a few vendors that are building capabilities with that. There are some organizations that have tried to use SPIRE for sort of more of a zero trust workload management kind of target state model. You've got Whimsy, which is the web infrastructure, machine security infrastructure through IETF. That's a working group, again, looking at how to solve, the management of workload identities. So there are a few standards, but I think those are the two main ones. But there's things like SPICE, OpenID, FDO, that also exist as well. Again, look, this is a maturing space. Everybody acknowledges sort of managing workloads. Moving to zero trust is very, very difficult to do. So definitely we need to rely more and more on standards. And I think a lot of the products over time will converge as the standards mature, is my current view on the topic of standards.
So I dropped a link out there to the Spiffy book, but it's the Spiffy.org website. And I didn't link to the other one, but we can out there if you want. Raise your hand out there. But we'll move on to that last question because we're just about to the top of the hour. Last question from Avinash. What's your thought on the job market around specifically keeping AI in mind? How many IGA tools coming up with this AI suggestion features?
Didn't quite.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you're out in the job market while this is happening. I think IGA is identity governance, I think is what he's saying. With this many tools coming up, what is this doing to the job market?
Look, I think our prediction is right that there's going to be a new set of expertise and SMEs that are going to be coming through in the next few years, and they're going to be sort of NHI experts. Look, I think in the industry, there's not many folks that can say they've successfully tackled NHI risk, and even though I've done it in many orgs, I've not necessarily done it to sort of a target state zero trust model. So I would say there's very few that have tackled this problem, but it's a problem that every organization is facing. The fact that half of the audience here is looking at this problem, but there aren't huge numbers of SMEs out there in the industry. And that's something we want to help through our community. And that's part of our mission, right, is to evangelize, educate. We've had so much feedback from so many people to say, look, we really excited about this NHI space. We want to learn more. We want to get into it. We want to become SMEs. So I think there's going to be a new breed of kind of practitioners that are going to come up. But look, I think anyone that's got strong IAM, PAM skills, I think those skills are very transferable. And I think to the question, look, this is going to be a very highly desirable skill set to have, from high-end advisory consulting to actually doing sort of integration, remediation activities that I think we'll start seeing in the next year or two, lots of NHI specialists in the industry.
Well, thanks again for being here. We're almost right at the top of the hour, but I just wanted to do a quick wrap up with you, say thanks, and give you one last chance to tell us anything else you need to tell us before we get out of here.
Thanks, Dwayne and GitGuardian, for giving me the opportunity to talk about NHIs. Hopefully you can see we're so passionate about it. Our goal, as I said, is to educate, evangelize. We've got the most comprehensive knowledge center, at nhimg.org. If you go there, right at the top, you'll see our ultimate guide to non-human identities, which is a 70-page report I produced. Took over a month to produce, so it's a pretty heavy read. But it pretty much tells you everything you need to know about NHIs, why, what's the risk, the standards, regulatory implications, the market. So I think just come to our site. Look, our goal as an organization is to provide independent guidance and advice to organizations to help them on their journey. Again, there aren't really many groups that offer that service today in the industry. But our goal is to be the leading group that can educate you and advise you and support you on this, probably the most difficult risk in the industry to solve. So if you ever need any just general guidance, advice, questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
And I will double that and say the same thing. If you feel, hey, you're alone out there, you need somebody to talk to on this, this is something we're actively thinking about a lot at GitGuardian, because we're building a governance platform with y'all and trying to help people stay safe out there as we're dealing with this quite honestly, a crisis. That's what we called this, the non-human identity crisis, and it's only accelerating. So time to get governance in place, time to get this on the roadmap, time to tackle this at scale. And Lalit, thank you for, again, making this part of your mission in life is to help educate people and raise awareness. Couldn't thank you enough. And thanks everybody for being here. I hope you learned something today and got something out of it.
Great. It's been a pleasure. Thanks everyone for joining.
All right. Cheers.